Good evening, everyone. Wonderful to be with you tonight. So let's just first settle in a bit. It's always good to check in with the body, see how the body's doing. So we're not trying to elicit any particular response from the body. We're just noticing what's there. So we can first notice perhaps that we're breathing. This is good. It's not necessary to breathe in any particular way. Just acknowledge that the body knows how to do this. It doesn't require our manager's role. We can just allow it to do what it knows how to do, and just, if anything, just a sense of appreciation for it, sense of gratitude, that it does it without us having to manage it. I mean, if we had to remember to breathe or remember to beat our heart, we'd all be lucky to make it through the day. So we can just notice how the body feels with the breath. Just notice how the belly moves with the in-breath, perhaps. You can also just sense into how the body feels to be in the surroundings that it's in, just maybe the temperature of the air, the feeling of sitting wherever you're sitting. Again, we don't need to make it different than it is. We can just notice that pure sensation of it, the body's ability to sense into its surroundings. And as we do that, we're still breathing. And also just notice that there may be thoughts arising. It's not necessary to try to suppress them, try to improve the quality of the thoughts, trying to make them more spiritual. You just notice, okay, thoughts arising. So any attempt that we might feel that shouldn't be happening tends to energize those thoughts. So the thoughts themselves aren't a problem. It's just simply an arising within that which we are. So we don't have to try to damp them down. We don't have to try to improve them. We don't have to try to think special spiritual thoughts. We can just notice, okay, thoughts are happening. We can notice that we're not really in control of what thoughts may arise or not arise. What we do have control over is how we respond to those thoughts, whether we get hooked by them and taken for a ride, whether we feel threatened by them and feel like we have to change them somehow. But we don't need to do either one of those. We can just notice that, okay, thoughts arising, If we really look carefully, we can't really say where they're arising from, whether they're arising from within this body mind, maybe, maybe not. We really look closely, we can't even really say for sure whether they're my thoughts. All we can say for sure is that thought may be happening. So we're just going with the direct perception. So right now we have identified breath, perhaps movement of the belly with the breath, sensation of sitting, sense of being present in whatever space you are in the room. And the sensation of noticing if thoughts are arising, just noticing that as well. All arisings within awareness, right? Without the awareness, there'd be you wouldn't know whether any of those things were happening. So we can just gently shift our attention to the awareness itself rather than the content of that awareness. Right? The content can be whatever it is. It actually doesn't matter. What does matter is our recognition of that awareness within which the content, whatever it is arising. We have a certain lifespan, passes away. So that's the important part. It's not actually of great value to manage the content for the purposes that we're talking about. So as we just ease back into just that simple, because you could say pure, and that's not a judgmental thing, it's just pure meaning absent of content, prior to content, more fundamental than content. So we can just ease ourselves back into not just looking at awareness, but looking from that awareness, looking as that awareness at whatever happens to arise. So we can also note anything that our mind or body comes up with that is trying to pull us out of that awareness. In other words, pull our attention into content rather than into the, you could say, context of awareness. So anything, any story, any belief, any idea, any attempt to conceptualize, any memory, any hope, any ambition for things to be other than they are, anything that you feel is tugging at your attention, we can notice whatever that is, we can notice that to be the next arising within consciousness. Again, we don't have to imbue it with belief or disbelief, like or dislike, good or bad. We can just notice, okay, that is the next arising. The arising itself, we don't really have control over that. It's good to acknowledge that. Again, what we do have control over is whether to devote our attention to it, whether to sort of assign it importance enough to focus our attention and allow it to pull us away from just this simple awareness. So as we sense into this awareness, notice that we haven't attained anything that wasn't already present. We just shifted our attention back, you could say, away from the content, back into the noticing of that awareness. So the awareness itself notices. So there's not a witness hiding back there somewhere. There's not a higher self hiding back there somewhere. It's just awareness, aware of all the experiences that arise within this body-mind. It's aware of the breathing. It's aware of the body movement. It's aware of the sensation of sitting in the chair, being present in the room, noticing whatever thoughts may be happening. The awareness itself doesn't actually have an opinion about any of that. It's not judging us for whatever our experience may be. It's present for it. You might notice that the awareness actually isn't a result of self-improvement. It is as it's always been present for, well, everything that's ever happened to us in our whole life. It's been there for. Our attention may be elsewhere, but that awareness has always been there. It is what notices. So we can just feel into that. I mean, does that awareness feel intimate? Does it feel like deeply what we are? Or are we looking at it from the perspective of mind, trying to get a concept right? Concept isn't really helpful here. Actually, less than helpful. What is helpful is just to notice that just simple awareness, the simple presence of it, the non-judgmental character of it. Intimate, right? So we're not attaining awareness. We don't attain something that's always been there. We can recognize it. Yeah, it's true that we might first recognize it more as a concept, but again, it's just the mind wanting to stay in control. And we can see that, and then just allow us to just come back into just the simple, direct presence of that awareness. And as we become more familiar with that, and by familiar, I just mean coming back to that space often, just like we did in the last few minutes. You can even do it more quickly than that, just to check in. Is that aliveness here now, for example? Is that awareness present for this moment? And as we get comfortable with the recognition that every time we stop to check in, there it is. We don't create it. We don't try to achieve it. It's just turning the attention around away from all those fascinating objects out in the world or in our head, and just coming back to what notices all of that. As we get more and more familiar with that, we can just sort of gently drop a question into that stillness. And the question could be, am I that awareness? Is that what I truly am? And the mind might be eager to jump in with a conceptual response. Again, we can see, well, that's what the mind does, and we can relax about it. And just allow the question to just be. Almost like if you had a, quiet pond, not a breeze, glassy surface, and the question just is like a pebble dropped into that. You just allow the ripples to spread. Without trying to answer the question conceptually, without trying to get the right answer, right? It's just sensing into what that actually is. I wonder, I've heard that, but I wonder if that could actually be true. I mean, true like in my own direct experience. Could it be that what I am is this awareness? Not that me as a separate person has this quality called awareness. But I wonder if I could actually be, am I that? Have I always been that? Again, we're not talking about attainment. We're not talking about self-improvement. We're just talking about our direct perception into what we are. So the mind can be useful in this investigation. It can be useful in clearly seeing what we're not. For example, if we use the mind to see clearly that the thoughts arising in our head are not under our control. And that's pretty easy to see. We have the opportunity to see that anytime we sit down to meditate. Anytime we find ourselves thinking about something that we don't want to think about. We realize that thoughts really aren't under our control. So that's something the mind can be useful for, to see that, okay, I have sufficient evidence to conclude that I can't have total control over my thoughts. If this is true, then we can stop spending a great deal of energy trying to do that. We can just see, okay, thoughts arise. We can't even be quite sure where from. If we can't even be sure that they're my thoughts, do I take ownership of them? We tend to be fine with taking ownership of thoughts that we like and sort of assign to some outside force the thoughts that we don't like. But if you're gonna claim ownership, you gotta take them all. But we can use the mind to investigate whether that's actually even true or not. So that's something that the mind can be helpful to do. It's helpful to investigate what we're not. What it's not suited for is to determine and be the judge of the truth of what we actually are. It's just not the right tool. It's not the right tool because it is an object within our perception. The mind, we can look at the mind, therefore it is an object within our perception. We can look at the body and our perceptions that the body registers within the field of our awareness. Therefore, the objects within the awareness are not the awareness itself. So if we're trying to use the body or trying to use the mind to discover our true nature, we're using an object to understand the source. It's not the right tool. And we can use the mind to see that. It just helps the mind to relax a bit. And we can just settle back into just that simple sense of awareness. The mind gets restless with that. It likes content. It doesn't like spacious awareness. So it'll get restless. It'll say, well, okay, I've sort of understood that consciousness thing. Show me something else. Show me something more exciting, some higher truth. And we can notice that tendency and just see, okay, there's the mind being ambitious, wanting to attain, wanting to something to be different than it is right now. Mind's good at this. The mind is a worthy adversary, right? This is good. This is a good thing. If the mind wasn't so clever, our realization of what's actually true wouldn't be refined, wouldn't be clarified, so that we can really, really see it, appreciate it, be it, function as it. Right? So it's a good thing that the mind keeps testing us. And as it does that, we can just bring ourselves back into the awareness and notice any tendency that the mind can come up with to pull us away from that awareness. And when it does, that's okay too. But since we've spent a vast majority of our life totally fused in that experience of experience outside. It's helpful to just see that that awareness is always present, that presence is reliably there. We just have to just step back, let the experiences subside a bit for a while, and just come back to that simple sense of presence. That's pretty much it. If we can just stay with that one simple practice, just to come back to that awareness, and notice whatever is arising within that is just arising within the awareness. It's the awareness that actually has the permanence, right? The events, experiences, thoughts, bodily functions, all of those come and go. All of those are subject to impermanence within the field of awareness. So we can just keep coming back to that space. It's actually simple. Mind has trouble with simple. Mind likes complex. But just that one simple practice of just coming back to this sense of presence, spaciousness, awareness, consciousness, whatever you choose to call it, prior to content. That space within which everything else happens is just to come back often. Get familiar with it. Sort of like walking into a dark room that you haven't been in before. First, you can't see anything, you can't make anything out, don't know what's there. But after a while, your eyes adjust and you see there's a vastness there. And it's the same with the awareness. When we first encounter it, it may be like, yeah, okay, that's interesting. Seems a little dry, a little conceptual. But don't be put off by that. It may not appear like that. It may appear like an explosion. That's cool too. But often it can feel a bit dry, like, okay, awareness, okay. Just give it some time, give it some attention, some loving attention. Right? Allow it to reveal itself. Don't demand. It's okay to state one's intentions, but then allow existence to figure out how best to reveal that to you. Because everyone's different that way. So really just come back to that space often during the day. Doesn't need to be an extended period of time. That's good when we can do that, but don't postpone it if there's other things going on during the day. We all have a few minutes here, a few minutes there. It's really our devotion to finding out what's true we express that devotion by our actions. Are we really curious enough? Do we really want to know enough to spend a few minutes here, a few minutes there, coming back often during the day to that space? So like I said, that's pretty much the whole practice. Of course, there's many implications that follow, but that's the doorway. It's the easiest doorway. It's the most direct doorway. Okay, I thought what we could talk about tonight is spiritual humility. So to talk about that, I thought we could probably best talk about plain ordinary humility first. So humility, well, the word itself comes from Latin. It just means low, to have a low opinion of ourselves. That could be as a result of, events in our life. We just have a poor opinion about ourselves. Or it may be that we were just led to believe that we were somehow unworthy, right? So it seems like a lot of us are trying to manage our experience. On the one hand, we have, utter unworthiness, right? And on the other extreme, we have excessive pride in ourselves, right? But we could call the midpoint there, for convenience, we can just call it so-so. I feel so-so, and it seems like for a lot of us, the goal is to move the needle sort of on the positive side of so-so, but not so far in that direction that we become excessively prideful about ourselves. Right? So it seems like for a lot of us, there was a sense of somehow that we had to earn our way to get into positive territory. Somehow we were born in a hole, and we had to dig our way up to get to ground zero. That we somehow started off with some sort of debt that we had to somehow earn the right to, feel good about, being here on this earth, being alive, participating in this creation. And it seems a lot of that really came out of our culture or our specific upbringing. We probably all know some children growing up that, maybe held that same attitude as adults, but for whatever reason, their parents or circumstances gave them a sense of, being pretty good about themselves. Okay, they didn't really question their being here. Other kids and other families, other circumstances may have had just the opposite experience, where somehow they were made to feel somehow insufficient. That just being wasn't enough. They had to somehow prove their worthiness, had to do something, achieve something, get good grades, be good at sports, whatever, to sort of be okay, just to make it on the positive side of so-so. I know in my own family growing up, my father, for whatever reason, I think it was, I don't know, maybe the movies that came out of the 1930s or so, before I was born, where one of the popular characters was sort of a spoiled kid. And my dad especially was so worried about his kids growing up spoiled that he sort of went out of his way to diminish any successes that we have, or always remind us that, well, there'd always be somebody better than you, no matter what you did. And so, even though I did well in school, well in sports, etc., even with that, apparent evidence, I found myself in my 20s still feeling on the negative side of so-so. And I didn't quite know how I got there. I wasn't clear enough at the time. There's something that, even though I had done some things that I considered accomplishments, it didn't matter. There was something that created a sense of not quite enough. So the usual remedy for that, for unworthiness, the usual remedy for that is to imagine, well, I'll just do something to prove my worthiness. So I'm guessing that we've all met people, even later in life, even people, out in the world, being relatively functional, still being driven to prove that they're not unworthy. Still basing their worthiness on what they've accomplished, or their unworthiness on what they didn't accomplish. Right? So that's how we normally view this sense of worthiness. So on the one side, there's this humility born of a sense of not really being somehow worthy to be on this earth. Somehow deficient. Anybody ever feel like that? Most of us don't spend our entire life on one side of so-so or the other. Often we drift back and forth. Things go our way, we start to feel good about ourselves, we think, oh, okay. And then, someone says something about us, or, we're defeated in some sense, or, we don't get the job or the lover that we hoped we would. And then our self-image sort of slips into negative territory. So it feels like we're constantly trying to manage not only our experiences in life, but how we view our experiences in life. Two different things, right? One person can have an experience, feel quite good about it. Somebody else can have that exact same experience and say, well, that wasn't quite enough. It wasn't, quite fulfilling enough to satisfy me. I still feel a lack. So it's not just the experience, not just the accomplishment or lack. It's how we view that. So it's this self-reflection happening, this self-judgment happening. So again, on the one side, we have, humility, just having a low opinion of ourself, and the other side, excessive pride. Then we have all these self-help courses, right? That we're not trying to actually manage our abilities so much as that they're trying to improve the way we think about our abilities, right? Improve our self-image, right? Sometimes beyond what we're actually capable of. If anyone's ever looked for a job and went to the self-help section in the bookstore, there's all these books about how to write the resume to paint yourself in the best possible light. If you've ever been in the position of reading other people's resumes, you can see this game that's happening. There's the actual abilities, and then this tendency to portray them in a way that is maybe more favorable than the circumstances require. So it's, again, it's sort of managing the perception, for the benefit of ourselves, of course, or to manage how other people see us, right? All in the service of what? The sense of self, right? The sense of, I just want to feel worthy. I want to feel at home in this body and this life. There's also another related concept, and that is modesty, right? So remember when I was growing up, probably 10, 11, so in late 1950s, I used to watch baseball on TV. And after a game, whatever the star player was for that game, they'd interview them. And in those days, modesty was a virtue, right? So they'd always, give credit to their teammates or their coach or, just their good fortune. And, they wouldn't claim any extra credit for themselves. But, deep down, you knew that they were pleased with their performance. So this modesty was sort of out of seeing it as a virtue to underplay your accomplishments. So that was the late 1950s. 1964 came around, sort of changed the rules of things, and Muhammad Ali came along and proclaimed, "I am the greatest." Nobody did that before. He just said it. Other people may have thought it, but they thought, well, modesty is a good thing, so I won't actually claim that. But he just flat out claimed it. I mean, the fact was that he actually at that time was the greatest boxer, at least. And so it wasn't false modesty, certainly, but it was also not claiming anything beyond that which he actually was. So in a sense, you could say that was a true statement as far as that particular moment. I mean, it was also good marketing too. But it changed everything after that, so that this idea of sort of self-promotion, sort of enhancing one's sense of self-image became more acceptable. That's sort of a slippery slope, because it's easier to enhance one's self-image than it is to actually enhance one's abilities or one's understanding. So we can see today how that's played out more and more, where it's sort of become socially acceptable in some circles just to exaggerate, just exaggerate well beyond one's own abilities. But again, we're still talking about managing our self-image, right? Trying to edge our way from the negative side of so down toward, on the humility, beaten down side, up to feeling good about ourselves. And I know there's also such a thing as people that have sort of, for whatever reason, have grown up with sort of a positive image about themselves. It's not based on any particular accomplishment or ability, but just, that's sort of their outlook on life. Those people are more free from this struggle to sort of work my way up from a sense of unworthiness. I know I've told this story before, but it is completely relevant to what we're talking about. In the 1990s, there was a American psychologist who went over to see the Dalai Lama at that time had fled Tibet and was living in India. And the psychologist went over to see him. And the Dalai Lama hadn't at that time had extensive interaction with Westerners that he had later on. And the psychologist asked him, well, what about this sense of unworthiness? And the Dalai Lama, who could speak English, with an accent, but he could understand English perfectly well, had to ask his translator several times, like, what is this? What is he talking about? And after several interchanges, the Dalai Lama sort of finally got the gist of what this unworthiness was, and his response to the psychologist was, doesn't exist in Tibetan culture. Just doesn't exist, right? So it's not an innate human perspective, right? It's cultural. Maybe founded in certain religions, maybe founded in a vague concept that even if you're not of a particular religion, it still sort of infiltrates the culture. Somehow a sense of original sin, that there's something defective that we have to work our way out of. So this humility is different than modesty, right? Modesty is, can be false modesty. It can be, example might be if someone says, I am the most humble person you'll ever meet. Right? The most humble person, there's pride in that, right? It's just sort of dripping with pride. But the claim is humbleness. So we can see that as false. We can see that as, trying to convince other people, maybe even trying to convince yourself. So all of this that we've been talking about has to do with, working on self-image, trying to work our way into a sort of adequate feeling about ourselves without tripping into the dangerous territory of pride. I mean, if we start to feel too good about ourselves, then, if we've oversold ourselves, then we can begin to feel vulnerable. You can see that in some movie stars where they've been built up by the public so much that they feel vulnerable because at any moment that could change. I mean, they realize deep down somewhere how vulnerable that level of elevation is. Can they sustain it? What if their next movie flops? What if people change their mind? What if people's taste changes? What if you just get old? So we feel, even on the positive side, we can feel vulnerable. We can feel like, that effort is required just to maintain a certain self-image that we can believe and hopefully other people will believe. So all of this is dealing within this belief in a separate self, belief in what we are is our storyline, our accomplishments or failures, hopes, dreams, regrets, shames, that whole package. So all of this movement about self-image, worthiness to worthy, we can see that unworthiness, no matter what we do, there would always be a sense of, well, you know, is that really enough? Is that really enough to make me feel permanently worthy if my basic presumption is unworthiness, right? What would I have to do to shift the needle? You know, do I need to single-handedly solve world's hunger? Would that do it? You know, what would be enough? And there are a lot of people walking around that have accomplished things in their life and yet still hold this sense of um, unworthiness. I was always amused. There was, I read somewhere about famous last words, the final words just before death of some famous people. And Leonardo da Vinci, you know, arguably one of the most creative, prolific um, um, persons operating in, you know, a number of different fields that ever lived. And his dying words were, "I could have done more." So still this sense of what I am has to do with what I do rather than what I am has to do with what I accomplish. Not just being isn't sufficient. Okay, so that's the whole sort of spectrum of possibilities. We can go on and on about that. But all right, so what about spiritual humility? You know, where does that fit into the equation? Is there a spiritual benefit in trying to be humble? Well, maybe on a relative sense there is. You know, I guess I'd rather have someone erring on the side of humbleness than erring on the side of excessive pride. But it's not really what spiritual humility is about. Um, it's really seeing, well, it's recognizing what we are. When we recognize what we truly are, we see that it's not dependent. It's not a function of what we've done, what we haven't done, not even a function of our beliefs. It's just who we are. And when we discover that, what we truly are is this spacious awareness, like we talked about at the beginning, we can hopefully soon realize that it's not a personal awareness, that it's actually just awareness. It's what actually enlivens these body minds, exists as these body minds in an undifferentiated kind of way. You know, so when we see that, if we can see it in ourselves, we can hopefully soon see it functioning in precisely the same way, as precisely the same thing, this awareness in everyone. You know, the expression of that may be tainted by their conditioning, by their failure to examine what this life is about. That's true. But the awareness itself is undifferentiated. When we see it here, we see it everywhere. You know, the Declaration of Independence in the US, you know, made the statement that all men are created equal. You might notice they didn't say all people, they said all men are created equal. They left out women and people of color, etc. So, but even that expression is only true in one very specific sense. And And it's not true in every other sense. It's not true that all people are created equal in terms of health, in terms of beauty, in terms of opportunity, in terms of comfort, in terms of the quality of parenting that they received, quality of just intelligence, athletic ability, physical appearance. I mean, every way that we can measure that, we can see differences everywhere we look, right? So on the level of appearances, there's not equality. We can't claim that everyone has had an equal opportunity, an equal, physical ability, equal intelligence. That's clearly not true. So the only place where that statement is true, that all are created equal, is when we're talking about awareness. That's where the unity exists. And when we see that, we can allow the differences in appearance to be. The difference in appearances then become the diversity of life, the immense creativity of creation, of existence, right? Not all the same. We're different in that way, in appearances, not in essence, right? So that's seeing that and allowing those differences. It's not an attempt to make those differences disappear on the appearance level. It's just sort of a radical acceptance of differences at the level of appearances. It's all good, right? However creation appears, it's good. Right? It's good because we can see that the source is one source, one. That's where the unity, that's where the equality actually exists. When we can see it as existing there, then it leaves us free to enjoy the differences rather than trying to resolve it on the level of appearances. So spiritual humility isn't something, when we recognize what we truly are, it's not an elevating experience. We may have striven for decades to find enlightenment, awakening, but when it's realized, what's realized is that it is not an elevating experience. I know that might be disappointing to somebody, but that's the truth of it. It doesn't raise us above anybody else, and if it does in our own head, we become a danger, because it's just not true. What we do realize is that awareness, which is operating here, is operating everywhere, as and through everyone. So it doesn't elevate us above other people. It also doesn't, diminish who we are below other people. It's just not relevant, right? If we're doing it based on, accomplishments, intelligence, I don't know, bravery, athletic ability, whatever other way we judge it, there are differences, right? There's comparison. That's what a lot of us do. We're comparing ourselves based on all these other criteria, when all along, in essence, there's unity already, without attaining anything. So when we recognize that, we don't win the battle from unworthiness to worthy. We just see it as a conceptual game. We don't win it. We see it as an illusion. We walk away from the battle. It's just not who we are. So why continue to believe that we have to somehow win that game? We can't win the game by accomplishing more, proving something to ourselves. What we can do is see what we fundamentally are, and that just free of that. It's not even in the same domain, right? So that humility doesn't come out of, it's not a practiced thing, right? We're not doing it to be spiritual, not doing it to gain anything, right? It's not even something that we're willfully doing at all. It's just the only accurate, true way to live life. Right? We recognize that, we're not in a competition with other people. We're not evaluating where we are compared to where other people are. Where in essence, it is undifferentiated. So this spiritual humility isn't a high thing, it's not a low thing. It's just it's of a different dimension. It's not a practice. It's just, the only reasonable, true way to live this life.